In a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and lush green fields, there lived an elderly man named Elijah Jameson. At 78 years old, he was known throughout the community as a kind-hearted soul who always had time for others. His hair was silver, his hands were weathered from decades of hard work, and his eyes carried the wisdom of someone who had seen both joy and hardship in equal measure. Despite living a simple life, Elijah exuded warmth that made everyone feel welcome. Elijah's days followed a predictable rhythm. Every morning he woke up before sunrise to tend to his garden, a patch of land behind his modest home filled with tomatoes, cucumbers, marigolds, and roses. Gardening wasn't just a hobby. It was his way of staying connected to nature and finding peace after losing his wife Margaret 5 years ago. They had been married for over 4 decades, raising 3 children together. Though she was no longer by his side, Elijah often spoke to her photograph on the mantelpiece, sharing stories about his day or asking for advice when things got tough. After finishing his chores in the garden, Elijah would head inside to prepare breakfast: a cup of tea and 2 slices of toast with butter. He liked keeping things simple, much like how he approached life itself. Once he finished eating, he'd grab his walking stick and make his way to the local library where he volunteered twice a week. There, he helped organize books, assisted visitors looking for recommendations, and occasionally read bedtime stories to children during weekend events. The kids adored him, calling him Grandpa Jameson, even though none of them were actually related to him. To them, he was a grandfatherly figure who radiated love and patience. On days when he wasn't volunteering at the library, Elijah spent his afternoons visiting friends or attending meetings at the community center. Over the years, he had become something of a pillar in the neighborhood, offering guidance to younger residents and lending a helping hand whenever needed. Whether it was fixing a leaky faucet, mending a fence, or simply listening to someone vent about their problems, Elijah did it all without expecting anything in return. People admired him not because he was extraordinary, but because he was consistent, always showing up, always caring. Despite his generosity, Elijah led a frugal lifestyle. After retiring from his job as a postal worker 20 years earlier, he relied on his pension and savings to get by. He didn't own a fancy car or expensive gadgets. Instead, he cherished the little things: a warm meal, a good book, and the company of loved ones. His house, though small, was cozy and well-maintained. Pictures of his family adorned the walls, snapshots of his wedding day, his children graduating from school, and his grandchildren blowing out candles on birthday cakes. These memories were his greatest treasures. One sunny Thursday afternoon, Elijah decided to visit the local bank to deposit a check he had received from his pension fund. It wasn't a large amount, just enough to cover his monthly expenses, but it meant a lot to him. Money had never come easily to Elijah, and every penny was earned through sweat and determination. As he slipped the check into his worn-out leather wallet, he felt a sense of pride knowing that he could still take care of himself without burdening his children. The bank was located a short walk away from his house, so Elijah set off on foot, enjoying the fresh air and the sound of birds chirping overhead. When he arrived, he paused for a moment to admire the building's modern design. With its glass doors, polished marble floors, and sleek furniture, it looked nothing like the small post office where he used to work. Elijah adjusted his hat, smoothed down his shirt, and stepped inside, feeling slightly out of place among the sharp suits and designer handbags. As he approached the counter, Elijah noticed the young woman behind the desk typing furiously on her computer. She glanced up briefly, giving him a polite smile before returning to her screen. Elijah cleared his throat softly and placed his deposit slip and identification on the counter. "Good afternoon," he said cheerfully. "I'd like to deposit this check, please." The teller picked up his documents and began examining them closely. At first, Elijah thought nothing of it. He assumed she was simply following protocol. But then he noticed her expression change. Her brows furrowed, and she leaned back slightly, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. For a fleeting moment, Elijah wondered if he had done something wrong. Had he forgotten to sign the check? Was there an issue with his ID? Before he could ask, The teller excused herself and disappeared into a back room. Minutes passed, and Elijah stood there awkwardly, clutching his wallet and trying to ignore the stares of other customers. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, growing increasingly uneasy. Finally, the teller returned, accompanied by a tall man in a suit, the bank manager. "Sir," the manager began, his tone clipped and formal, "we need to verify some information regarding your account." Elijah nodded politely, though confusion clouded his mind. "Of course," he replied. "Is there a problem?" Without answering, the manager gestured for Elijah to follow him to a private office. As they walked, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly amiss. The once familiar surroundings now felt alien, almost hostile. Little did he know, this routine trip to the bank would soon spiral into an ordeal that would test his dignity, resilience, and faith in humanity. Though the details of what happened next remained unclear to Elijah, one thing was certain: his quiet, unassuming life was about to change forever. What started as an ordinary day would soon become a story that captured the attention of an entire nation, a tale of injustice, redemption, and the enduring power of family bonds. As Elijah Jameson sat in the private office of the bank manager, his mind raced with questions. Why had he been singled out? What possible reason could they have for doubting him? The room was cold and impersonal, with stark white walls and a desk that seemed too large for the space. Elijah felt small, almost invisible, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. Yet despite the unease gnawing at him, he tried to remain calm. He reminded himself that misunderstandings happened all the time, and surely this would be resolved quickly. The bank manager, a tall man with a stern expression, took a seat across from Elijah. His nameplate read Mr. Thompson, but his demeanor offered little warmth. Without making eye contact, Mr. Thompson began asking Elijah a series of rapid-fire questions. "How did you come into possession of this check?" he asked sharply. "Can you explain why the amount seems unusually high for someone in your situation?" Elijah blinked, taken aback by the insinuation behind those words. "Situation?" he repeated softly, his voice tinged with confusion. "I'm retired, sir. This is my pension check. It comes every month. I've deposited checks like this here for years without any issues." But Mr. Thompson didn't seem convinced. Instead, he exchanged glances with the teller who had flagged Elijah earlier. Her face remained impassive, though her earlier suspicion lingered in the way. She avoided looking directly at him. Elijah noticed how their eyes darted toward his worn-out clothes, his scuffed shoes, and the old leather wallet he clutched tightly in his hands. It dawned on him then, they weren't just questioning the check, they were questioning him. They saw an elderly black man dressed modestly, and assumed he couldn't possibly belong in a place like this. Before Elijah could protest further, 2 security guards entered the room. Their presence immediately shifted the atmosphere, turning what had been a tense conversation into something far more menacing. One of them stood near the door while the other approached Elijah, towering over him. "Sir," the guard said gruffly, "we're going to need you to come with us." Elijah's heart sank. He opened his mouth to speak but found himself momentarily speechless. All he could do was stare at the men surrounding him, searching for some sign of compassion or fairness. But none came. Instead, he was asked to empty his pockets and hand over his belongings, including the check he had brought to deposit. Each item, a pen, a receipt, a folded tissue, was scrutinized as if it held secrets to a crime he hadn't committed. By now, word of the commotion had spread throughout the bank. Customers waiting in line craned their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. Some whispered among themselves, speculating about the scene unfolding before them. A few even pulled out their phones to record the interaction. Elijah, who had always valued his privacy, felt exposed and humiliated under the weight of so many judgmental stares. He wanted nothing more than to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare and find himself back in his garden tending to his roses. The guards escorted Elijah out of the office and through the main lobby, past rows of polished counters and gleaming ATMs. Every step felt heavier than the last, each one dragging him further away from the dignity he had worked so hard to preserve. As they reached the exit, Mr. Thompson called out, "We'll hold on to your check until we can verify its authenticity. You'll hear from us once we've completed our investigation." Elijah stopped in his tracks, turning to face the manager. "My check?" he said, his voice trembling slightly. "That money is mine. I earned it. How dare you treat me like a criminal?" For a brief moment, there was silence. The bustling activity of the bank seemed to fade into the background as everyone turned to look at Elijah. His quiet indignation cut through the air like a knife, forcing people to confront the reality of what was happening. But Mr. Thompson simply adjusted his tie and replied coolly, "We're just doing our job, sir. If everything checks out, you'll get your funds back." With that, the guards nudged Elijah forward, pushing him out the glass doors and onto the sidewalk. The bright sunlight outside only heightened his discomfort, contrasting sharply with the dark cloud of shame hanging over him. He stood there, for several minutes, clutching his walking stick and trying to process what had just occurred. Had they really accused him of being a thief? Was this truly how the world saw him after a lifetime of honesty and hard work? News of the incident traveled quickly through the small town. By evening, nearly everyone had heard about what happened to Elijah at the bank. Some were outraged, calling it a blatant case of racial profiling and discrimination. Others, however, were less sympathetic. At the local grocery store, whispers followed Elijah as he browsed the aisles. "Did you hear about what happened?" One shopper murmured to another. "They say he tried to cash a fake check." Each comment stung, chipping away at Elijah's confidence and self-worth. He had spent his entire life earning trust and respect within the community, yet now he found himself defending his character against baseless accusations. Even friends who knew him well struggled to reconcile the kind, gentle man they admired with the image of someone capable of fraud. Though many believed in his innocence, the damage had already been done. That night, Elijah returned home feeling defeated. The house, usually filled with warmth and memories, now felt hollow and unwelcoming. He hung up his hat, set down his walking stick, and collapsed into his favorite armchair. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry, not out of anger but out of profound sadness. He thought about Margaret, his late wife, and how she would have comforted him during such a difficult moment. He thought about his children, scattered across different cities, and wondered if they would ever fully understand the pain he was experiencing. As he sat there, staring blankly at the wall, the phone rang. Startled, Elijah wiped his tears and answered it. On the other end was Marcus, his youngest son, the same son who had grown up playing in the very garden Elijah tended daily. Now a successful entrepreneur living in Silicon Valley, Marcus rarely had time for long conversations, but tonight his voice carried an urgency Elijah hadn't heard before. "Dad, are you okay?" Marcus asked, concern evident in every word. "I saw the video online. Someone recorded everything at the bank. Is it true? Did they really accuse you of stealing?" Elijah hesitated, unsure of how much to share. Finally, he sighed and said, "Yes, Marcus, it's true. They treated me like a criminal right there in front of everyone, and I don't know what to do." There was a long pause on the line before Marcus spoke again. His tone was firm, resolute. "Don't worry, Dad. We're going to fix this. I promise you no one will ever treat you like that again." Though Elijah appreciated his son's reassurance, he couldn't help but wonder what Marcus meant by fixing the situation. Surely there was nothing anyone could do to undo the humiliation he had endured. Still, hearing his son's determination gave him a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in his darkest moments he wasn't alone. Little did Elijah know, Marcus wasn't just offering empty promises. Unbeknownst to him, his son was already formulating a plan, one that would not only restore his father's honor, but also send a powerful message to the world about justice, equality, and the importance of standing up for what is right. The phone call with Marcus left Elijah feeling a mix of emotions, relief that his son was there for him, but also uncertainty about what could possibly be done to undo the damage. As he hung up the receiver, Elijah leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling, replaying Marcus's words in his mind. "We're going to fix this," Marcus had said, his voice firm and resolute. But how? What could anyone do to erase the shame and humiliation he'd experienced? Still, Elijah trusted his son implicitly. If Marcus said he'd handle it, then Elijah believed him. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Silicon Valley, Marcus Jameson was already putting his plan into motion. Though he lived a life vastly different from his father's humble existence, Marcus had never forgotten where he came from. Growing up, he'd watched Elijah work tirelessly to provide for their family despite countless challenges. His father's values, hard work, integrity, and kindness were the foundation upon which Marcus built his billion-dollar tech empire. And now, seeing the man who had taught him everything treated so unjustly ignited a fire within him. Marcus spent the rest of the evening diving deep into research. He scoured social media platforms, news articles, and local forums, piecing together every detail of the incident at the bank. The viral video captured by a bystander painted a vivid picture of the discrimination his father faced. In the footage, Elijah appeared calm and dignified, even as the guards surrounded him and escorted him out like a common criminal. The comment section was a battleground of opinions, with some defending Elijah and others perpetuating harmful stereotypes. It made Marcus's blood boil, but he knew anger alone wouldn't solve anything. He needed action. A bold move that would not only vindicate his father but also send a clear message to institutions that allowed such injustices to occur. By morning, Marcus had assembled a team of trusted advisors, lawyers, and public relations experts. They gathered in the sleek conference room of his company headquarters, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. Yet none of them were admiring the view. Their focus was entirely on the task at hand. Marcus stood at the head of the table, projecting an image of determination that commanded respect. "Here's the situation," Marcus began, his tone measured but intense. "My father, an honest, hard-working man who has given his entire life to serving others, was falsely accused of theft because of the way he looks and dresses. This isn't just about him. It's about systemic prejudice, bias, and the lack of accountability in places we're supposed to trust. We're going to change that." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I've looked into the bank's ownership structure, and it turns out they're part of a larger financial group struggling financially. That gives us leverage. I want to acquire the bank, not just to make a statement, but to transform it from the inside out. We'll overhaul their policies, leadership, and culture to ensure something like this never happens again." The room erupted in murmurs of surprise and admiration. Acquiring a bank was no small feat, especially on such short notice, but if anyone could pull it off, it was Marcus Jameson. His reputation as a visionary leader who thrived under pressure preceded him. Within hours, negotiations were underway. Marcus spared no expense, leveraging his resources and connections to expedite the process. By the end of the day, he had secured preliminary agreements to purchase the majority stake in the bank. The speed and decisiveness of his actions sent shockwaves through the business world, leaving analysts scrambling to understand his motivations. While the acquisition was being finalized, Marcus turned his attention to the public narrative. He understood that storytelling mattered, that people needed to see the human side of this story to truly grasp its significance. Working closely with his PR team, he crafted a heartfelt message that would resonate with audiences worldwide. The goal wasn't just to defend his father's honor, but to spark a broader conversation about racial bias and economic inequality. 2 days after the incident, Marcus held a press conference outside the bank's headquarters. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for position, eager to hear what the billionaire entrepreneur had to say. Standing beside him, looking slightly uncomfortable but deeply proud, was Elijah. Though Marcus had initially suggested conducting the press conference alone, Elijah insisted on being present. "This is my story too," he told his son. "If you're going to fight for me, I want to stand by your side." When it was time to speak, Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding yet compassionate. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady and confident. Many of you have seen the video of my father, Elijah Jameson, being wrongfully accused at this very bank. Let me start by saying this. My father is one of the most honorable men I know. He raised me and my siblings to believe in fairness, empathy, and hard work. Seeing him humiliated in such a manner breaks my heart, but it also fuels my resolve to create change. He paused, glancing at Elijah, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. What happened to my father wasn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a much larger problem, one that affects millions of people every single day. Bias doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it hides behind polished desks and professional titles. But today we're taking a stand against it. Marcus went on to explain his decision to purchase the bank, emphasizing that this wasn't about revenge or profit. I didn't buy this bank to punish anyone, he clarified. I bought it to rebuild it, to turn it into a model of inclusivity, transparency, and accountability. Starting today, we're implementing sweeping changes. This includes mandatory training for all employees on recognizing and addressing unconscious bias, revising policies to protect vulnerable customers, and launching initiatives to support marginalized communities. My father's ordeal will not be in vain. The audience listened intently, captivated by Marcus's passion and eloquence. When he finished speaking, Elijah stepped forward hesitantly, clutching a piece of paper in his trembling hands. Though he wasn't accustomed to public speaking, he felt compelled to share his thoughts. "Thank you," he began, his voice soft but sincere. "Thank you for standing with me and my family during this difficult time. I don't consider myself special. I'm just a simple man who believes in doing the right thing. But what happened to me reminded me that we still have a long way to go as a society. I hope my story can inspire others to keep fighting for justice and equality." His words brought tears to the eyes of many in the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every moment of this historic event. Socially, media exploded with reactions as hashtags like Nagang Justice for Elijah and Nagang Change the System trended globally. People from all walks of life shared their own experiences of discrimination, creating a powerful collective voice demanding reform. Back in home that evening, Elijah sat quietly in his living room, reflecting on the whirlwind of events. Earlier that week, he had been an ordinary man simply trying to deposit a check. Now he found himself at the center of a movement spearheaded by his own son. It was overwhelming, yes, but also profoundly meaningful. For the first time since the incident, Elijah felt a sense of purpose, a belief that his suffering might lead to something greater. As Marcus joined him on the couch, patting his shoulder affectionately, Elijah smiled faintly. "You didn't have to do all this, you know," he said softly, "but I'm grateful you did." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "Dad, this isn't just for you. It's for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of who they are. You taught me to stand up for what's right, and that's exactly what I'm doing." In that moment, father and son shared a bond stronger than ever before, a shared commitment to turning pain into progress. Little did they know, their journey was just beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, requiring resilience, patience, and unwavering dedication. But together they were ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that even the simplest acts of courage could ignite lasting change. With the press conference behind them, Marcus Jameson wasted no time turning his ambitious plans into reality. The acquisition of the bank was officially completed within days, and the transformation began immediately. What had once been a symbol of injustice and prejudice quickly became a beacon of hope and reform under Marcus's leadership. Every decision he made was guided by one overarching goal: to ensure that no one would ever experience what his father had endured. The first order of business was addressing the culture within the bank itself. Marcus understood that systemic change required more than just new policies. It needed a shift in mindset. He assembled a diverse team of consultants, including experts in diversity training, psychology, and community outreach, to design comprehensive programs aimed at educating employees about unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. These weren't going to be your typical corporate seminars where people nodded along half-heartedly. Marcus insisted on interactive workshops that forced participants to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their assumptions. One particularly impactful exercise involved role-playing scenarios based on real-life incidents, including Elijah's ordeal. Employees were asked to step into the shoes of both the accuser and the accused, experiencing firsthand how quickly stereotypes could escalate into harmful actions. Many walked away from these sessions visibly shaken, realizing for the first time how their own biases might have influenced past decisions. For some, it was an eye-opening moment that sparked genuine introspection. For others, it was a wake-up call they desperately needed. In addition to employee training, Marcus implemented sweeping changes to the bank's internal policies. He introduced stricter guidelines for handling customer disputes, ensuring that accusations like the one against Elijah would require substantial evidence before any action was taken. A new oversight committee was formed, composed of independent members from various backgrounds to review all claims of misconduct or discrimination. This added layer of accountability sent a clear message. The bank valued fairness above all else. But Marcus didn't stop there. Recognizing the importance of representation, he overhauled the bank's hiring practices to prioritize diversity and inclusion. Job postings were rewritten to eliminate language that might discourage certain groups from applying, and recruitment efforts expanded to reach communities historically underserved by financial institutions. Within months, the bank's workforce began to reflect the rich tapestry of the town it served, a mix of ages, races, genders, and socioeconomic backgrounds working together toward a common goal. Outside the walls of the bank, Marcus launched several community initiatives designed to uplift marginalized groups and foster trust between the institution and its customers. One such program provided free financial literacy classes to low-income families, teaching them how to manage budgets, build credit, and invest wisely. Another initiative offered small business loans to entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities, helping them turn their dreams into reality. These efforts not only empowered individuals, but also strengthened the local economy, creating a ripple effect of positive change. Elijah played an integral role in these endeavors, serving as both an advisor and a spokesperson for the bank. At Taoyangxiu, first he was hesitant to take on such a visible position, fearing that his lack of formal education or corporate experience would make him ill-suited for the task. But Marcus reassured him, saying, "Dad, you don't need degrees or titles to inspire people. Your life is your credential. You've earned the right to speak through decades of hard work and resilience." And so, Elijah embraced his new role with quiet determination. He attended meetings, shared his story at community events, and even helped oversee the implementation of the bank's diversity programs. His presence brought authenticity to the movement, reminding everyone involved of the human impact behind their efforts. Customers who had once doubted him now greeted him warmly, apologizing for their earlier skepticism and thanking him for his courage. Word of the bank's transformation spread far beyond the borders of the small town. National news outlets picked up the story, praising Marcus and Elijah for their groundbreaking approach to addressing systemic inequality. Journalists interviewed employees, customers, and community leaders, all of whom spoke highly of the changes taking place. Social media buzzed with support, as hashtags like "Child Justice for Elijah" evolved into "Dari Banking for All," a rallying cry for inclusive banking practices worldwide. Despite the widespread acclaim, not everyone welcomed the changes. Some former executives grumbled about the unnecessary focus on diversity, arguing that it detracted from the bank's primary mission of generating profit. Others criticized Marcus for using his wealth to buy justice, claiming his actions were performative rather than substantive. But Marcus remained unfazed by the naysayers. He knew that true progress often came with resistance, and he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As weeks turned into months, the bank flourished in ways no one had anticipated. Customer satisfaction ratings soared, attracting new clients from neighboring towns. Young professionals eager to align themselves with socially responsible businesses applied for jobs in droves. Even skeptics began to see the value in Marcus's vision, recognizing that inclusivity wasn't just morally right, it was also good for business. Through it all, Elijah marveled at the transformation unfolding around him. Walking into the bank now felt like stepping into a completely different world. Gone were the cold, impersonal vibes that had made him feel out of place during his fateful visit. In their place was warmth and respect, embodied by smiling employees who greeted every customer, regardless of appearance or background, with kindness and professionalism. One afternoon, as Elijah sat in his garden tending to his roses, Marcus joined him, pulling up a chair to sit beside him. "How does it feel, Dad?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the thriving plants. "Seeing everything bloom?" Elijah chuckled, brushing dirt off his hands. "It feels good," he admitted. "But it's not just about me, Marcus. It's about proving that even when things seem hopeless, there's always a way forward, if we're willing to fight for it." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, gazing at the vibrant flowers surrounding them. "You know, this garden reminds me of what we're doing with the bank. It takes time, patience, and care to nurture something meaningful. But when it finally blossoms, it's worth every ounce of effort." Father and son sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sunlight dance across the petals. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, they found solace in knowing that their journey had sparked something beautiful, a legacy of justice, equality, and compassion that would endure long after they were gone. Little did they realize, however, that the most profound chapter of their story was yet to unfold. While the bank continued to thrive, Elijah's ordeal had ignited conversations far beyond the confines of their small town. People from across the globe were beginning to take notice, drawing inspiration from the simple man who refused to let adversity define him, and the son who stood by his side to rewrite the rules of the game. The ripple effects of Elijah Jameson's story continued to spread far beyond the small town where it all began. What had started as a personal tragedy transformed into a global movement, inspiring countless individuals and organizations to examine their own roles in perpetuating or challenging systemic inequality. The bank, once a symbol of bias and exclusion, now stood as a shining example of what was possible when compassion and accountability intersected with power. Elijah himself became an unlikely icon, a quiet, humble man thrust into the spotlight, not because he sought fame, but because his resilience resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. His presence at community events, interviews, and panel discussions brought authenticity to the conversation about racial bias and economic justice. Audiences listened intently as he shared his experiences, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. He didn't preach or demand retribution. Instead, he spoke from the heart, urging others to treat everyone they encountered with kindness and respect. One particularly memorable moment came during a national conference on financial inclusion, where Elijah was invited to deliver a keynote speech alongside Marcus. As he stepped onto the stage, a place he never imagined himself standing, Elijah paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. For a brief second, he felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. But then he remembered why he was there, not for himself but for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible or unworthy. "I'm just a simple man," Elijah began, his words carrying a weight that silenced the room. "I've lived my life by 3 principles: work hard, be honest, and care for others. Those values have guided me through good times and bad, but even I wasn't prepared for what happened to me at that bank. Being accused of something I didn't, it shook me to my core. It made me question whether my efforts mattered, whether anyone truly saw me for who I am." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "But then I realized something important. This isn't just my story. It's a story about how we treat one another, about how easy it is to judge someone based on appearances rather than actions, and about how much harder we must work to see each other clearly, to recognize the humanity in every person, no matter where they come from or what they look like." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in admiration. Tears streamed down cheeks and hands clutched tissues as people processed the depth of Elijah's message. It wasn't just his words that moved them. It was the sincerity behind them, the sense that this elderly man bore no bitterness despite everything he had endured. Back home, the changes at the bank continued to gain momentum. Employees embraced the new culture enthusiastically, finding pride in their role as agents of positive change. Customers noticed the difference too, sharing stories of how staff members went above and beyond to assist them. One elderly woman recounted how a teller patiently helped her set up online banking after years of avoiding technology. A young immigrant couple described how a loan officer worked tirelessly to secure funding for their dream business. These anecdotes painted a picture of a bank that wasn't just serving its customers, it was empowering them. Marcus, meanwhile, balanced his responsibilities as CEO of his tech empire with his newfound role as a champion for social justice. Though juggling both worlds was challenging, he found fulfillment in knowing that his father's ordeal had sparked meaningful progress. He traveled frequently, speaking at conferences, meeting with policymakers, and collaborating with other leaders to promote inclusive practices across industries. Yet no matter how busy his schedule became, he always made time for Elijah. On weekends, father and son often returned to the garden that had been Elijah's sanctuary for so many years. They planted new flowers, pruned overgrown bushes, and reminisced about the journey they had taken together. "You know," Marcus said one sunny afternoon, leaning against a tree, "when I first heard about what happened to you, I wanted to burn that bank to the ground. But now I think buying it was the best decision I ever made." Elijah chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Sometimes, Marcus, the hardest lessons lead to the greatest growth. That bank taught us both a lot. Not just about fighting injustice, but about building bridges. You've done more than just change an institution. You've changed hearts." As the months passed, Elijah's health began to show signs of wear. Years of manual labor and stress had taken their toll, and though he remained active, he couldn't deny the fatigue that crept into his bones more often than before. Still, he refused to let it slow him down. With Marcus's encouragement, he documented his reflections in a memoir titled "From Humility to Hope: A Life Reimagined." The book chronicled his journey, from growing up in poverty to raising a family, from facing discrimination to becoming a symbol of resilience. Its release was met with widespread acclaim, further cementing Elijah's legacy as a beacon of hope. By the time the memoir hit shelves, the impact of Elijah and Marcus's efforts extended far beyond the confines of their hometown. Other banks and corporations began adopting similar reforms, inspired by the blueprint Marcus had created. Schools incorporated Elijah's story into curriculums, teaching students about perseverance, empathy, and the importance of standing up against injustice. Even lawmakers cited the case as they drafted legislation aimed at combating systemic racism and promoting equitable access to financial services. Though Elijah never sought recognition, he found joy in knowing that his experience had ignited a chain reaction of positive change. At a special ceremony honoring his contributions, he addressed the crowd with characteristic humility. "I didn't do this alone," he said, gesturing toward Marcus, who stood proudly beside him. "And none of this would have been possible without the love and support of my family, friends, and community. This isn't the end of our journey, it's just the beginning. There's still so much work to be done." Years later, when Elijah passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, the world mourned the loss of a remarkable man. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe, celebrating his courage, wisdom, and unwavering spirit. The bank he had once been humiliated in renamed itself the Jameson Equity Bank in his honor, vowing to uphold the values he embodied throughout his life. Marcus, though devastated by his father's passing, found comfort in carrying forward his legacy. He established the Elijah Jameson Foundation, dedicated to promoting financial literacy, supporting marginalized entrepreneurs, and advocating for systemic reform. Through the foundation, Elijah's influence reached even greater heights, touching lives in ways neither he nor Marcus could have imagined. In the end, Elijah's story proved that even the simplest acts of defiance against injustice could leave an indelible mark on the world. It reminded us that true strength lies not in seeking revenge but in using adversity as a catalyst for compassion and change. And it showed us that sometimes the most powerful voices are those that speak softly, but carry profound truths within them.